Cool.
Right.
Lots of people. I've had, I don't know, probably half a dozen at least people request that this be recorded, and they want to see it afterwards. So you're a popular guy. So again, thanks, Brian, for doing this. I'm gonna do just a quick shout out for More Good Jobs because we have quite a few new folks too, and give you some background as well. So if you could please mute your microphones, would appreciate it. Not you, Brian, but others. There we go. So More Good Jobs is a community largely founded by a good friend of mine, Martin Babinek, who asked me to help build back in early part of 2021. And essentially what we are is a community for startup community builders. These are entrepreneurs, large part, who really care about supporting other entrepreneurs in their community, typically located outside of major startup hubs like a San Francisco or Boston or New York or something like that. And that didn't distract me at all, Alicia. Sorry, my wife's on the other side of the camera. So and anyway, so they're largely focused on helping entrepreneurs in their communities, and are typically one of only a couple people in their region, and traditionally are historically pretty geographically dispersed. So that's been kind of the benefit of creating this community of peers online, is it's a space for us to come together and have our own community, essentially, to commiserate and share best practices and do cool things like this, where we talk with Brian to learn more about how the gaming community formed out in Capital Region. So do lots of events like this, usually around one a week. And we have a Mighty Networks platform. I'm going to share an invite link to all of you in the chat. Once I can pull up the chat. Totally free. We'll feel free to check it out. We get little topic threads on there. We post more and more events. We can add you to the calendar invites on a recurring basis and stuff like that too. All of this, I should also note, is through I guess we're housed under the Keenan Center at Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York, which is a center where, although we are within the institution, are largely focused on helping develop entrepreneurial talent in Central New York. Zach is one of our students, actually, former students. No, current student. We have an independent study. We do a lot of really cool stuff there, and it matches well with More Good Jobs, because all of us who run that center are also community builders and trying to, connect with peers doing similar things across the country, which there is a lot. So anyway, that's my pitch. Please check that out. I hope you'll join us and help promote more entrepreneurship in regions like ours throughout the country. But now I'll get to you, Brian. I'm really excited for you to join us. And I know you are one of many players, and you were very clear about that in your email with me, who have been part of helping build the industry, we'll call it industry cluster, the community in Greater Capital Region. But I also want to just sort of pass it off to you. You're welcome to obviously mention everybody to tell that story, and then you got a lot of people who are really interested in talking with you about it too. So why don't you take us back to the early days, which probably predate you even, so you understand it, of that community forming in region.
Cool. Yeah. So hopefully we can kind of make this interactive, and if anybody has questions, just put up hand, jump in. James can.
Use the raise hand function. That'll probably be the easiest way for me to identify and call you out.
Yeah, cool. That sounds great. So so just a little bit about me for anybody who doesn't know me. Currently, I'm a vice president at Krafton, which is a Korean-based, South Korea-based game publisher. And I run North and South America business. So that includes game publishing, community, PR, marketing, all the esports program, 2 of the development studios, and then some corporate development activities that are happening kind of like within the region here. Prior to that, I worked more on the kind of like game development side. So this is maybe 3 years ago, back on the game itself. Our main game is called PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. And then so the game itself that we run, it's called PUBG. Our biggest version is mobile. Kind of interestingly, we don't create the mobile version of our game, which is the biggest version of our game. It was actually licensed to Tencent. So Tencent creates it, publishes it in most regions. And this is kind of something you see if you don't have a background in gaming, is these business relationships are often like very complex. So we create the game, we create a version of the game, we own the IP, we license another studio to create another version of the game and then publish that game in some regions, but we even publish that one that we don't create in other regions. So it's incredibly complex. The biggest sort of like growth areas for the game right now is MENA. So, Middle East, North Africa, India is one of our biggest growth regions, Southeast Asia. So in general, in the gaming industry, those are our big growth regions right now, especially for mobile games. And I'll take everybody through the community thing, but just, to level set and things like that for people who don't come from gaming. So, gaming is a giant industry right now. $206 billion is the size of the industry this year. If you sort of break that down, about $90 billion of that is mobile. I think it's like 30 or 40 or something like that is console. PC is like a little smaller than that. And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. The smallest piece is the one you probably see the most, which is like esports, which is maybe $1.5 billion or 2 billion. That's compared to the entire size of the global, business around creating game content. It's about 0.5% of the industry. And then around that, you sort of have like the gaming hardware, which is maybe 40 billion. You have like related gaming software, mobile advertising for games, things like that, which is like 30 billion. But, if you're drawing this picture in your head, the biggest part of gaming is the games themselves. The biggest part of that is mobile. The biggest and most popular types of games are free-to-play games, which are games you can download. There's no barrier to entry. You can play them, sign in. And then usually they're monetized through things like in-game skins or battle passes, or there's something that you can then optionally buy. In most cases, you can play the game without it. I'm sure everybody's run into this stuff at this point. So most of my time these days is spent working with the teams here, trying to find new game companies to buy sometimes, or new ways to publish the games we have. And actually, my last day with PUBG is March 31st. So this is also my last month with the company. So our big gaming conference every year is called GDC. It's at the end of this month. So I'm going to kind of go to GDC, and the same weekend that I'm back from GDC is my last day at the company. So so that's sort of where I am now. And I can take everybody back and we can talk about the gaming cluster back in yesteryear.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, wait, what's next? What's next?
I got a couple ideas. One is probably start another studio. I'm kind of an entrepreneur at heart, so I might raise some money, start a game studio. I don't know, but I'm kind of at the point where I want to do a couple different things. So might do a couple different things. I don't know. In my spare time, I'm a venture advisor for Convoy Ventures. They're maybe one of 3 or 4, probably 4 or 5 now, like really focused gaming venture capital companies. We got started mostly investing in gaming tech. So when Zach is talking about Web3 games or things like that, did a lot of investing in that. But these days, anybody who wants to be successful as a game investor has to at least be involved in content somehow. There's this old rule in gaming, which is it's like really simple, but the name of the game is the game. That's always been true. It always will be true, in my opinion. Gaming companies create fun. So like it has to be about the game. So yeah, I've spent a couple years, looking around the industry and seeing what's out there. And another option, if I don't start a studio, is maybe just get more into kind of the capital side, which has been pretty interesting, learning all about that. I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah,
a lot of options ahead of you.
Yeah, hopefully, and continue to expand the region, which is what I've always been passionate about, which I guess is why we're here. So
yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess presumed within that is that you plan to stay in the region to do those things.
Yeah, so almost 20 years ago, 20 years ago, not quite, almost 20, I married a teacher. And the kind of deal that we had was we'd get married, but I wasn't allowed to leave. so back then, I really wanted to go out west. This was probably early 2000s, and you guys remember there was a bit of a crash there, but then a lot of exciting stuff was kind of happening. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kind of time period where the Googles were springing up, and YouTube's out, and all these big companies. And nowadays, I think a lot of people look at these companies like they're evil. Back then, we looked at them like they were the coolest thing ever, because they're creating a whole new way to work and everything, right? So in my head, I'm still a boomer like that. I still think of these guys generally as a force for good. But so the deal that I had with my wife was, you can do anything you want as long as your ass is in a seat here. And so, part of like my part of my limitations in life, or my constraints, and it's good to have constraints in life, makes you work harder, but part of my constraints was a geographic constraint. Nowadays that doesn't seem like such a limitation. Back then it seemed like a severe limitation.
Sure.
Yeah, so I got started in gaming actually working for a casino company. Have no idea how to gamble, don't like gambling, don't even know how to play poker, but we were making slot machines as a subcontractor for the New York Lottery in Schenectady. And that was kind of how I got started in gaming. And, what got me really excited was I really liked all these sort of back end online systems, the idea that you could take a bunch of these games and connect them together and people could play together. I just, have always been kind of excited by that. It's just amazing, right? And, to just kind of take you back in time back then, this was still pretty early in connected games. So on the console side, the Xbox was out. I think it had an Ethernet port, but barely had any online services. And so this was all really early. This is before Facebook, before YouTube, before all these kind of companies. So I was spending nights and weekends, no kids, thinking about how to do all this stuff. And then, I went to school for engineering at Clarkson. So writing code, thinking about the stuff in my head, about how it would all work. And after a couple of years with this lottery company, I got promoted pretty quickly because my bosses just kept quitting. So I think it was by default. It definitely wasn't by skill, but it was like, all right, well, there's nobody left, so put the kid in. So by the time I left, I was GM for this company at 27, and like running 3 states and all their income and stuff through all the slot machines for New York. We did the accounting systems and all the central systems. And so, a story, a sort of like common thing for me is the second we go from growth and building to stabilization and operations, I'm just done. I'm a builder. I just know myself. I fucking hate that. So the second the job kind of got to be like, wow, we did it. Let's, for the next 10 years, all we have to do is make this thing work and count the money. I quit. And so I went to work for 40% less money, and for this little company in Troy called Agora Games. And they were like a web development company that, and again, back at this time, like the web people were some of the people who knew how to do this networking stuff. The gaming companies didn't. And sometimes today they still don't. So we were lucky enough to get a contract through Vicarious Visions, which is Karthik and Guha Bala. I don't think they're here, but I'm sure everybody has seen their names before. And they really are like I guess if there was a godfather of the gaming industry, godfathers, co-godfathers of the gaming cluster down here, it's those guys. They started their company in high school. It was acquired by Activision pretty early for a pretty good amount of money. And then they spent 20 years building games and bringing people here. But as I've said, the second things kind of get boring, my brain is on to build something else. So I got this gig at Agora Games as a CTO, and my job was to sort of take some of the tech that they had been building for Guitar Hero and commercialize it for other games. And within 2 years, we had commercialized it, got the company acquired by a company called Major League Gaming. And so I went on to work for them. And so I guess I stayed with Major League Gaming for maybe a year or two, and then left then as well. So same thing, stock was underwater, didn't look like it was going to go anywhere. I said, forget it, I'm out, going to build something new. But in the meantime, Karthik and Guha and myself. Steve Flannery is the guy who still runs the old Agora company. Toby Saunier, we're all close, and I think that's one of like the key things is that when it comes to this ecosystem stuff, you got to have a bunch of people pulling in the same direction. It's okay that everyone's not totally doing it for altruistic reasons. I mean, people want to succeed and make money and grow things. That's healthy. That's capitalism. But it does help when people kind of have this bigger picture in mind, and like we always did, So, Toby's company, First Playable, I wouldn't say grew out of Vicarious, but she worked for Vicarious. Then she split off and started her own company, and so she had sprung up too. So, this one original seed had now turned into 3 companies, and we sort of have always had this pact between all of us that we've tried to keep any of the business that we brought to the region in the region. So, when every time one of these companies gets acquired, even if there's no personal gain, we're sitting around trying to figure, well, how do we keep all the other business in the region? and it's an actual thing people get together and talk about.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's I think that's been one of the keys for us, is that there's probably, originally like this main 3 or 4, it's probably now grown up to 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 of us that are all pretty good friends, and we constantly talk about how to keep the business in the region. And then also, because gaming isn't something you just do for work, it's something you fucking love, right? I mean, I just love it, right? I'll probably play Elden Ring 2 hours this afternoon because I canceled the meeting. We just like it. So what you love is your job, which is great. And what's fun about it is it's infectious. So like at one point I was looking for a lawyer who I could work with, and who would kind of get this. And I found this weird lawyer who turns out he's like an ex-DJ, likes video games, and we kind of trained him up on the industry while he trained us on all things legal. He's walked through the difference between different types of options and founding companies and QSBS with me a million times now, so it's drilled in my head. But same thing, like we sort of grew this network. So it's originally the game companies, and now it's starting to be some of these service companies. And actually, I think he's on the call. Steve Lichtenstein might be here, but
Yeah,
there he is. Yeah. So Steve is one of my best buddies at this point. I can text him nasty jokes and he laughs. But Steve has then taken that sort of, I think, seed that he got from, me originally, but he's taken that in directions that I wouldn't have imagined. So he's, gotten to a point where he now represents some of the largest gaming streamers in our country, are his customers. So he has access to the gaming industry in ways that I don't have at this point. But the great thing is, I'm starting a new company. The first thing I do is tell Steve, and Steve already knows what I'm going to do because he knows the old one.
I don't remember asking.
Yeah, and then Steve, has sort of introduced me to some of the folks that he's working with, and so we do it together. So, yeah, I would say the thing that's made this work for.
Yeah, that's classic right there. Wow.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
welcome to
Sorry
the
about
gaming
that.
community.
Not sure what that was, but removed.
Yeah. So, welcome to gaming, everybody.
You are looking good.
Thanks.
Yeah,
You too, buddy. So, hey, anyway, so, back to that. And, Steve's been one of my greatest buddies and that sort of thing. So we've always had this rule: keep the business local, bring new people in when we could, and sort of, it will compound. And, it's been 20 years, but it's worked. Like, we've done this. So, Valen or Vicarious turned into, as I said, First Playable and Agora Games. Agora was acquired by WB, which is still here. So we brought WB in. I split out, started Mad Glory. It was acquired by PUBG. We brought PUBG in. When we were acquired by PUBG, we kept our Bethesda work, and we found a company to take it called Janelle Group in Schenectady. So now they're working for Bethesda. Some of our other business went to Wolfjaw Studios, who then took it in a completely different direction. If Mitch is on the phone, he's here too. You guys might know Mitchell Patterson, another probably best friend of mine in the world. So he's started his company, and we've just kind of all been there to support each other. And like we sort of all think of this in terms of like we've got these trading cards, and we keep adding another one into the deck. And it's really starting to steamroll now. We've seen a little bit of support start to come in from the state, which is really big because, as you guys all probably know, running a company in New York is not always the easiest thing to do. So we've started to see some help, and we understand and have been able to take advantage of the fact that like gaming is fun, gaming is sexy. People like to go home for Thanksgiving and talk about the fact that they work on games. That's not just me, that's politicians, that's the governors, that's everybody loves to go home and tell their kids who are playing Fortnite that, hey, did you know I just talked to one of the teams that helps work on Fortnite or whatever. So we understand that and we exploit that to our advantage, to the whole region's advantage.
What kind of support are you seeing from government? I'm actually curious, like if you have more specific examples of where they've been supportive.
So I will say, like, Karthik and Guha are probably the ones who work on this the most. They've just got the longest standing relationships here, but Mitchell as well, really, probably the three of them. But we saw a first tranche of support, and I think it was maybe a year or two ago, and it was a small amount of money, that was there to help support studios. And we've been trying to kind of conceptually model this a little bit after what goes on up in Montreal, because as you can imagine, like that's kind of the closest. I don't know if everybody knows this, but that is a huge gaming hub. It's the closest one to us. And if you're making content in Canada, but definitely Montreal, there's the Canadian Media Fund. There's multiple levels of programs that you can get reimbursement from the government on operational costs. It's not even,
Wow.
It's great. So I don't think ours will work exactly like that, but we've been working on that in general. They'd have more details, but yeah, we keep seeing it grow every year. We had Senator Schumer down here, I think it was last year, in the Valen Studios office, which is Karthik and Guha's new studio, here, and all of us showed up and kind of represented.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
So I got some other questions for you too, actually.
Sure.
Thinking about this, one of the things that I kept thinking about was the talent. You're trying to build these things. You need talent. I mean, you probably know that better than anybody. So
yeah.
Tell
I didn't
us
actually talk about that. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, a lot of this started down here with RPI. So RPI has had a excellent comp sci program, but and then added game design. Ben Chang's over there. So, in our little cabal of the businesses, there's sort of also the larger ecosystem of the universities too. So we've sort of been able to, I don't want to say exactly seed it, although the people that are in these roles, like, were kind of part of our community before they were in the roles. So I wouldn't say we seeded it, but it's worked out nicely. So like Mike Campion at SUNY Albany, and Mitchell's actually been working on creating a program at SUNY Schenectady County Community College. And so, yeah, we have been sort of offering advice and or seeding these programs, especially with these new certificate kind of programs that they're coming out with over the years. And we've got a great incubator. It's not really an incubator. It's Tech Valley Game Space. It's like kind of a place students can kind of go down and make indie games. But we're trying to expand this a lot more. I just bought a facility down here that I've been renovating, and one of the ideas, besides for putting game companies in there, is maybe devoting a third of it to actual training and certification for Unity developers. So some of this we've been doing on our own. Some of this is just cross training and things like that, and then some through the universities. But absolutely, like in our industry in general, as with many others, I know, access to good talent is the main challenge. But our region actually produces a lot already. So remember, one of the projects I worked on a few years ago was one of the customers that we used to have at Mad Glory, actually a customer of Mitch's right now, is called Riot Games. They're a huge game company, internationally loved, recognized. They're just great. And at one point a few years ago, we were doing some work looking into the area with them, and they were pulling up their HR database and saying, surprisingly, a high single or low double-digit percentage of our employees come from within 3 hours of sort of where you guys are at, 3-4 hours of where you're at, something like that. It was 6 years ago. But we started looking at other companies and started realizing, shit, we're actually already producing a lot of talent and exporting a lot of the talent, typically out west. So, we should be able to keep them if we can sort of get at them earlier. And that has worked for sure.
So you're recruiting young, essentially, is what you're saying, right out of school.
Yeah, we do. And then we also cross train a lot, especially for some of the stuff that's kind of like back end gaming and multiplayer. It doesn't really require this is kind of getting into the weeds on gaming, but it doesn't require game engine knowledge. It just requires kind of a general knowledge of back end and server systems. And so we can hire people from local companies and then cross train them into, the types of things that game companies need, which are very different than those types of things, but the tech is the same. So
Brian asked actually an interesting question. He said, has 100% of the talent you've worked with in your companies all been local to Upstate, or do you find there's a need to attract some more experienced talent from bigger metros, San Francisco, New York, Boston, etc.?
Well, if I'm speaking for the larger industry, I mean, like, we definitely are pulling in talent. So Activision has pulled in a ton at their studio here. For my companies, mostly myself, we've mostly tried to hire local and cross train up. I like to see the money go to people who are here if possible. Pre-pandemic, it's hard sometimes to get people to move, right? Post-pandemic, actually, in some ways, I think it's been a lot easier because a lot of people are a little more disillusioned with the sort of, LA, San Francisco, super high cost of living thing. And we, as you guys know, I'm sure you've seen the reports too, but there's been a migration out of a lot of big cities. So, we've been trying to take advantage of that. We could show, hey, look, for the same price you're going to pay in LA for a 1,600 square foot house on a postage stamp, you can own 5 acres and a mule out here. You can own a whole farm, basically. So, that the story has been pretty compelling. On the flip side of that, we have seen a lot of companies out west hiring talent here. So, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I lost a small team of people from our company to Electronic Arts, who hired up a small team of people. But this sort of the two perspectives there. One, hey, it sucks to lose people, but on the flip side, like, we've always been really good at hiring, training people, so that doesn't bother me too much. I'm happier that Electronic Arts, EA, now has a 3-person office within 15 minutes of us too. So, when you get the chance to look at the big picture of the whole thing, which has always been part of the goal, it's been awesome. So we're super fucking excited about that. It's great.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, rather than pull them out, they just said, all right, we'll set up. Well, I mean, that kind of speaks volume in terms of looking at metrics of, have we created a hub here?
Yeah, we have created a hub, and
right.
Yeah, we definitely have. And like, one of the things we've kind of become known for is this thing that, like, not everybody wants to do or knows how to do, which is, back end multiplayer networking. And like, we were talking about this in kind of the beginning of the call, but a couple years ago, that's still not like the most exciting part of game development. With this whole Web3 blockchain stuff that's coming out, this is largely a revolution in sort of back end and server side functionality. It's largely not a revolution in the in the front end. So all of a sudden, these jobs have gone from, if we could find people, we'll hire them, great, now back to focusing on the game, to, oh my gosh, this is a potentially core strategic advantage for our company if we can find people that have this type of skill, and then upskill them a little more into sort of the crypto blockchain stuff. So that's been a real change over the last 18 months, 12 months, probably even. That's a huge change.
Essentially, you're saying your region is strategically advantaged, I guess, in terms of talent.
Yeah, well, yeah. So like, we've got this critical mass of. So if you look across the industry, Warner Brothers' entire sort of back end multiplayer team is here in Troy, and then we were that team for PUBG Seoul for a little while anyway. On the contract side, Wolfjaw is that already for Among Us, for many other games, probably 15 or 20. Janelle Group does this now because they got a mild contract. They're doing that for Bethesda, which is now part of Microsoft. So we actually have a critical mass specifically in this area. And a new company we just that just was started by my friend Kirk Becker, called Rushdown Studios. So they're there too. So there is a critical mass of this one specific thing here, in addition to these other areas. And my point was that, if there's going to be more of these Web3 games kind of coming out, and there will be, these types of jobs are the ones that will sort of naturally cross train up to that. So I think that's also another like big opportunity for us.
Cool. I'm actually going to jump through some of the questions that are popping in
Sure.
through the chat.
Sorry, I can't open it. Something's stuttering on my screen. I don't know if I'm flashing, but here I keep flashing.
That's okay. Frankly, it's better to read it aloud anyway. Plus, we're recording, so
Cool.
no
Great.
worries. So, do you recruit from Can Code program as well? I'm going to sort of broaden that, say any code school type of thing.
No.
Okay.
We don't. I'd like to, but I think we really would need our own program, to be honest. It's not kind of compatible enough with that one. I think I love Anne Marie's a really good friend of mine. Her husband Joe is a really good friend of mine. I think it's an awesome program. It's just there's not enough like topical game experience that they're able to teach. I think with the time that they have people, we would almost need to take somebody out of that and then put them in a different program and then kind of put them through that, I think, for us anyway.
So I'll keep running with it too, because on this topic of talent, which is clearly of interest to a lot of people. How does the region introduce students to the game development industry? Are there dedicated high school, college outreach programs, or do students discover local industry organically? What sort of things have we done intentionally?
Yeah, I mean, intentionally, a lot of the colleges actually have this now. We're actually, this is kind of tangential, but like we're seeing esports programs pop up everywhere, during the pandemic. I was on the call the other day with Casanova about some work that they might be doing in the area. St. Rose put together a program. They have like an esports studio. So esports, game development, not really that related, but they're cousins, you know what I mean? Sort of second cousins. But it's definitely a way to get people excited and interested. So, but yeah, a lot of the colleges around here have been working with us on that, and we've been working with SUNY to try to introduce more of those types of programs. I think some of it is just getting the right 2 or 3 courses together. So, I mentioned Mitch at Wolfjaw earlier, but he's been working with SUNY to get this sort of 3-course certification in this back end game development stuff that we do that we've been so successful with. And so, part of that is databases and scalable server design and cloud computing and all this kind of stuff. It all gets married together, which is what's so tricky about it. But you pull a couple of these together, and I think what we get out of that is signal that at least somebody has an interest, and that maybe we can take them from there and kind of get them to where they need to be. Because you can kind of imagine games these days are some of the biggest multi-user applications on the planet. Well, they probably are. So, in order to take somebody from I took this course in college to I'm running servers for 200 million players. It's quite a distance.
Wow.
But we have to at least get signal that somebody's interested, and then we can kind of get them the rest of the way. So, the state's also been a little bit helpful with sort of like the apprenticeship and some of the workforce training stuff. They've started giving us some help on that so we could cross-train people. And I'm not really one that likes to take anyone else's money. I'm really somebody who likes to be self-sufficient. I don't like to be beholden to anybody. But I will say, these programs have been super helpful. And, I absolutely know we've created value out of them, because I know what somebody comes in and gets paid when they start working with us. And I know what they get paid when they leave. We've taken people and increased their salary by 3-4 times sometimes within 5 years, just from taking them in and working through us. So, we know we're creating value. So
yeah, for sure. We could go down the rabbit hole of how educational change really. Speaking of rabbit holes, Richard Glazer asked a big question. I love it, but
Richard always has good questions. I didn't see this one, so I'm
he
scared,
does
but let's hear it.
But I'm also saying we could talk an hour at least on this one topic, so we'll keep it brief. Elaborate about the future of crypto blockchain for gaming, its role, your experience, tech side, etc. And maybe rather than elaborate, say, keep it brief to your thoughts on.
Yeah, I could talk about this for hours. I've spent a ton of time on this over the last year, both for PUBG, and then also I've done some consulting with venture capital companies, and then also like non-endemics like MasterCard. I worked with them for a little bit on this. But it's so you have to understand from the perspective of gamers, Web3 is incredibly controversial right now, for good reason. It is true that there's a ton of scams, there's a ton of rug pulls, there's a ton of people taking money. It's the Wild West. It's a gold rush. That's not even a good word. It's just the Wild West. Like, it's crazy. However, there's some signal to say that there's something interesting here. And historically, games have always been first movers in new technology. So when mobile came out, games were and still are the biggest apps on mobile. When multiplayer came out, games. Facebook comes out, guess what? It was games again. It's always games. So games are always some of the first movers of new technology. They're always almost always the first big apps on any new platform. If it can run a game, it will run a game. So Web3 is a new type of technology, as everybody knows. And so what we're seeing is, yet again, games being some of the first movers and taking advantage of this stuff. What we're also seeing is like most of these games are not being designed by people from gaming. They're being designed by people from the blockchain community. So the first apps that you're seeing actually tend to be stuff that's more like gamified finance rather than, a new type of finance added to a game. So we're seeing games like new modes like play to earn, play to collect. These are new things that came out that are fundamentally new ways to play games, maybe. They've blown up really big. So like we invested early in Axie Infinity. They've done really well. Now, are these models sustainable? Are they even really games? This is where the debate starts to pop up. And so what I will say is I think a lot of what's out there now is probably not what's going to be out there in a couple of years. I think a lot of these things won't survive because they really aren't fundamentally games. But there was a ton of capital invested last year into new games being made by game developers who are taking a game first approach to Web3 and making new types of experiences where Web3 sort of hopefully provides new value to players instead of is instead of like the basis for how we're going to go build this. It's not the way, it's a thing that adds on value. And when we see these games come out, which really won't be for another 12 to 24 months, I think we will see Web3 add certain value. And just to sort of cap that one off, this is hotly debated, but for instance, there's a lot of stuff that's unlikely. People are talking about, hey, I'm just going to start trading, red hats between Fortnite and PUBG and Call of Duty. That's not going to happen. Like for a long, long, long time, maybe ever, maybe someday, but not anytime soon, for a lot of reasons that aren't even technical. But I think the most interesting thing that I've heard sort of summarized is that, look, like we in gaming have these certain price points to built into our heads, and how much money we're able to make from a game dictates how we can even build the game, the types of resources we can devote, the types of games we're able to build. It's a constraint, right? So sure. if our sort of typical price points are like 99 cents, $2.99, $7.99, $14.99, these types of things for in-game goods. But once you buy it, you can't do anything with it. Some games you can resell it at a marketplace, but most you can't. What Web3 potentially changes for us is that mental math, which changes the way value is sort of established in people's minds. So, if there could be a $49 item in a game, which players are willing to spend because maybe they can resell the item for $39 if they want, or $47, whatever, on these secondary marketplaces, even if it's within the same game, that changes the design criteria and the ways we can build games and potentially the types of games we can build. So I think the most exciting work is being done on this specific area right now. Thinking of Web3 in terms of, how does game design change with this capability, but still taking a very fundamental first, player value first focus, which is where it's got to be. Otherwise, it never works.
Martin had a good question too, unrelated, but good question nevertheless. So share any stories or insights about expanding the gaming cluster beyond Capital District to other upstate communities?
I don't think there's any, I guess I will say we're kind of aware of the other clusters around. I think it's not like anybody's, at least for myself, I just don't really have any frequent interaction with anybody. It's a lot of just sort of the same kind of crew we've been growing down here for 14 or 15 years now. So every year a couple new people sort of get brought in, and the round table gets a little bit bigger. Now we need an oblong table, but so I'm sort of aware that they exist, but I don't really have much interaction with them, to be totally honest. So
we got questions bouncing around. So
by the way, you guys know it's already a little hard down here because when you start thinking geography, it's like Saratoga, Troy, Schenectady, Albany, there's already these like 4 cities who are sort of all spread apart by 20 minutes. So, back in the pre-COVID days when everybody was really focused on specific locations and offices and resources here and there, like it was already hard to get everybody to work together. In the many ways, I think the post-COVID world has made all this simpler because everything's pretty much just gone virtual. So
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm curious just on that note for a second. Because I was even trying to figure out, I'm like, how do I market this? So people outside the region often say the capital region is sort of like one area, but I'm curious of your view on the dynamics between all of those, really, like you said, separate cities, but
definitely.
yet so close. I mean, 20 minutes is a commute.
Separate cities because we've got like, the Troy bid team works on certain things that happen in Troy. The Schenectady Metroplex works on the Metroplex. The Albany Chamber, the Center for Economic Growth unites everybody. They're all different groups, to navigate and work with when it comes to, these sort of municipalities and stuff. So, post-COVID, it's been easier because in some ways, like, we can hire somebody in Albany now, and I don't know, maybe they show up 2 days a week to the Saratoga office, but they're still fine. Before COVID, that was more of an expectation that they'd be there 5 days a week. And I think it probably never needed to be there. It's just that that's the way it sort of like was by default. And that's all changed now. So like, we're definitely seeing people move around a lot more, which I think is really good.
Awesome. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. So Chris is curious what options, opportunities exist for people in the gaming industry who may not come from a technical background. We've talked a lot about technical side.
Yeah, the technical side is obviously like kind of where I'm most comfortable. So I do tend to default to that. That's fair. But yeah, so there's kind of a couple ways to think gaming, the gaming content related stuff. There's sort of, in general, you could sort of think of it in terms of production, which would be, creating games, creating content, creating any of that sort of thing. And then sort of game publishing, which would sort of be marketing, community, PR, all the business and promotion related things. And, you see this similar setup in other industries too. So, for people who are sort of on the creative or production side, there's lots of different areas, anything from, art, technical art, game design, QA, development, and each one of those branches off into lots of little different, like unique areas. There's probably 40 jobs in there. On the sort of non-technical side or non-creative, non-production side, there's lots of jobs there as well. I will say the sort of business related jobs tend to be out west right now. They tend to be centralized in like kind of LA, maybe Seattle, maybe Austin, but they tend to be more west. The closest, I think, I'm not even sure we have a big game publisher in New York. I mean, Rockstar does a lot of their own stuff. So, in New York City, but typically it tends to be out west. Now, like that whole value chain of how that stuff is set up has also been flattened. I mean, a lot of dev studios and dev teams or production teams will do their own marketing and publishing, and that's never been easier today. Used to be that you had to go through a big publisher because you needed to get boxes in retail stores. That's been done for a long time. So it's never been easier. So it's, there are a lot of like production type jobs or that sort of stuff. We hired facilities managers and that kind of stuff to run studios here as well. Yeah.
So Brett, getting back to the student thing, Brett has an interesting question too, which is, are you finding the students that you're bringing in are coming with more entrepreneurial skills? I'll even add mindset to that.
I think, yeah, I think so in general. I think I think it's partially just the way that kind of like the zeitgeist has moved in the last few years with, sort of we're in a world now where like anybody can kind of be a creator, whether it's, I write code and I publish plugins and I sell them, or I, make YouTube content, or like everybody's mindset has sort of changed when there is now a way for you to take the output of your creativity and market it directly. So I think that's the main change. I don't know that it's necessarily because of anything the schools did. I think it's just, the way that people think a little differently about life and work, these days. So, but absolutely, I think we see that. And, there's a lot of room for that, which is kind of fun. For
Mhm.
instance, I'll give you one on this one. So the traditional game company, will make you sign a contract that says anything you create is owned by them. Part of that's due to the weird way that copyright law and things like that works in our country. But part of that's due to just the way that it's always been at game companies. So, if you go work at Activision, everything you do is owned by Activision by default, unless you get an exception. Again, that's the copyright thing in software development and creative work. But a lot of the newer companies, like my company, we always tried to be working within what we had to ensure that we owned the code that was created by the people that worked for us. Just is just a legal problem. We tried to be as flexible as possible with all of this other stuff, and we'd narrow the scope of the things that we had to take in order to ensure we own copyright. But so I think you've seen a lot of companies being a lot more progressive on that front. I know Mitch at Wolfjaw again is very progressive on that. We've always been. Some of our favorite people to ever work with or for, like Riot, is also very progressive on that front, or Psionics. These companies are like, they're realizing that, like, you can't take a passion driven industry that people do. Of course they want to get paid, but they do it because they love it. They have a burning desire to create, and then tell these people that they can't create at night, right? That's not a good plan for anybody. It's not good for the people. It's not good for you. So, I think people have kind of figured that out a little bit. And so you because of these changes, I think you see a lot more.
Very cool. Yeah, that's interesting insight to think about. Hopefully we have enough time to get through everything. But Johnny's asking, do you see opportunity to grow gaming basically south towards Hudson Valley area, or do you see it mostly maintaining that concentration in the 4 cities up there?
Man, I don't know. It's to be totally honest, I don't think that much about like this region versus that region anymore. I just kind of focus on like how many companies we're pulling over from the West Coast, because I think that's the main win for us right now. Is just I think this is the opportunity, which is a lot of big companies are looking for locations now that aren't just in big cities, because that's where their staff is telling them they want to be. So, I don't know the difference between,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't really think about it. I just mostly think of like, it came to New York, it's a win.
Agreed. That's a good mentality. I think
Yep.
to maintain. So
Probably it came to Upstate, it's a win. Let's be more clear on that one. As long as it's Upstate, it's a win. I don't really,
How have you? I'm curious too, like how I'll throw the COVID question out there. Like, just because so much of COVID drove us online. You've already mentioned a couple examples throughout, but I'll ask it directly. How has that changed it? I mean, there's just an industry that's inherent to being online. I'm really curious how that's accelerated certain things, maybe changed mindsets, opened new opportunities. I'll let you speak openly, purposely broad.
Yeah. So actually it was harder than you think, because so it's like, for instance, right, especially for certain parts of game dev, it requires these very expensive, high powered machines. So, like I think our game dev machines are like $7,000 or $8,000 just to buy a machine per person. And these aren't laptops, right? So
Yeah.
Like when COVID hits and everyone's got their too much, and it sounds silly, but they have to have these machines in order to do things like bake assets, compile things, render, and just work on a game. So it was really tricky, because you had to be at the office in order to have access to your machine. And then in addition to that, a lot of the assets that we move around are very large. And so, having everyone at home on a VPN or something like that, now we're all of a sudden limited in the velocity of which we can work by moving these assets around and by the machines that are there. So, but I will say, as I mentioned, gaming is very tech focused, tech first. So people were able to make the transition very fast. One of the studios that we own is called Striking Distance. They're working on a new game in California. And, I think within like 2 months, maybe, so the first 2 or 3 months, kind of people took their machines home and shit was just bad. And then at some point they kind of figured out, like, look, this is just going to have to be permanent, because we're not going to ship the game on time, and you got to ship the game. So, they bought a bunch of new equipment, housed it in a data center, bought everybody high-speed network connections, and just said, like, we're going to be home now, period, because we can't deal with this transition back and forth.
Wow.
And that's in the production side. On the marketing side, it's different. People are working at Macs or whatever. They can kind of be anywhere. But now that this transition sort of happened, all of a sudden you got a lot of companies who weren't really good at this that are good at it. My personal sort of crystal ball is that what we're going to see is that a lot of the sort of design oriented jobs, kind of coming up with what is the game, what does it feel like, what does it look like, these will transition back into offices because it's just faster and more efficient, which will be a competitive advantage for people who can do this in person. But some of the production level stuff around, we've got a plan, somebody go build this. It's actually kind of become a strategic advantage to be able to spread that out. Because you can kind of deal with costs and things through arbitrage and all this stuff. I think, I honestly think we're going to kind of end up with, even though a lot of the engineers I know really, really love this, and short term, I think it's good for them. Long term, I don't know that it's going to be that good for them because it puts them in a much bigger talent pool that is, globally competitive. And I don't know that it's going to be good for them, but that's sort of my guess.
So this has been awesome. I'm shocked at how fast we're going. Time has flown by. Well, in some ways not. You're an interesting guy and it's interesting. But my final question for you though, there's a lot of people on the call who are likewise passionate about their communities and saying, all right, this is a really exciting story. We're trying to build stuff here. What advice do you have for people like that to help their community based on what you've learned?
Yeah, I think number one is you need this cabal of people that are friends, friendly, and trust each other. Ideally, you need to be in a position where you're not competing. And that's always been good for us. The Ballas and myself, or Mitchell, or Toby, first place, we don't compete, right? Like we're all in the same industry and we don't compete. And even to the point where sometimes when people have spun up a new company, they've purposely kind of done it to make sure no one else is competing. At least I have. So it helps to not compete because there's nothing worse than kind of being in a room and not being able to say everything you want to say that could benefit everybody because someone over there could just benefit, steal your work, right? So you need this cabal. You need to be hopefully in a position where you're sort of not competing. And I think you need to have a sort of garden approach to the whole thing where you just constantly need to be planting seeds, and you don't really know what's going to grow. But you have to be planting them constantly. And, we're talking about this today, but, 14 years ago, we had one company here. So, it has taken a long, long, long time. And I didn't even count all of the indie companies that have sprung up out of all the developers that have worked here, so you have to have a long-term view. But I will say, I think it pays off, because, everybody wants to be everywhere right now these days, but this stuff just takes a long time. So if you have that long view, you're planting seeds and you have this sort of, this group of allies that you really can trust. If you can't text them, they're not an ally. So you got to be able to text them. That's like my threshold.
Good bar.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then I think, anybody can replicate kind of what we did. I think for sure. I don't think it's that unique.
LinkedIn connections don't count.
Yeah. No.
Well, that's a good point. I appreciate it, Brian, very much your time, man. This has been awesome. Frankly, it's making me think like we need to catch up more often.
Yeah, man. Great.
It's been a whole pandemic since I last spoke to you. I will, make one last pitch though. You mentioned that cabal of people. That's kind of what More Good Jobs is on a community building front. So while we're not specific to our own individual communities or to gaming or anything like that, for those of you who are interested, that's kind of what it's been. I've learned a lot from other people across the country living kind of parallel lives around this sort of stuff. So I'll add that invite link again to the chat. Hope you guys can join us, and we'll see you all next week. Same time, same location. We have Jack Greco from Buffalo talking about ACV auctions, another fun story. So please join us if you're available for that too. So thanks again.
James, I'll chuck my email and stuff in the chat, but also, LinkedIn, I have all of it listed, personal emails, websites, all that garbage. So if anybody wants to catch up or talk or whatever, feel free.
Beautiful. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it, man.
Yep.
Okay. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again for joining us. Take care. See you.